Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tax Talk, broadcast by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My name is Jordan Bateman, and I'm the British Columbia Director of the CTF. And I'm joined, as always, by our fabulous Alberta Director, Paige MacPherson. Paige, how are you?
I am doing well, thank you. It is sunny and warm here in Calgary, so happy to be here.
We had a huge windstorm here in BC yesterday. Rain, wind. It was pretty bad, and a few trees came down. And in fact, hit a few houses, and someone was actually killed by the windstorm. So crazy weather here yesterday.
That is crazy. It was windy here yesterday too. One of our tunnels got blocked by tumbleweeds. So prairie, right?
Alberta. Yeah, that's great. That's perfect.
Yeah, well, it's like a hashtag Berta situation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks everyone for joining us here live on Blab for Tax Talk. In a few moments, Paige and I will talk with Derek Frum, the staff lawyer for our good friends, the Canadian Constitution Foundation. They're like they're the organization that keeps us out of trouble. So we appreciate them greatly.
We're the yin to your yang.
That's right. Derek and his colleagues have just put out an eye-opening study on civil forfeiture laws and, frankly, I would say government abuse in Canada. And so we're pleased to have Derek with us to look at the issue. Derek, you doing well?
I am doing very well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Where are you based?
Well, I'm in Calgary, just outside of Calgary, actually. I'm at home right now, as you might be able to tell. But our main office is in Calgary. We do have some people that work for us in Toronto as well. And so it's like Paige was saying, it's wonderful weather here. I'm looking outside a window right now at the sunshine and really thinking it looks like summer. So I'm getting very excited.
Don't tell Leo DiCaprio. He's going to say it's climate change.
Yeah, well.
We should be in parkas through May in Calgary.
Bring it on if it means less snow.
All right. Well, lots of ways for everyone to connect with us. If you've joined us here live, make sure to subscribe to our feed to keep track of all our shows. You can comment in the sidebar, tweet us at Jordan Bateman or at Paige McP or at Derek James Frum. And you can even click call in to ask us a question live on video. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation, just so folks know, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization dedicated to three things: lower taxes, less waste, and more government accountability. That's what drives all the communications, research, and advocacy work we do. Or as Paige and I like to say, we're the common sense people in the room. When the politicians are beaking off at each other, we speak for the average Joe who has to pay the bill for their nonsense.
Exactly.
Be sure to visit our website at taxpayer.com, see what we're all working on. And if you're listening to this later as a podcast or recording, you can still check in with us. You can engage on our Facebook page, facebook.com/taxpayer.com, or email us at bc.director@taxpayer.com. All right, so guys, what's new? And I think we should let the guests go first, Paige. Derek, what's new?
Well, what's new? Well, our report, which we're going to talk about soon, has been generating a lot of publicity for us, and it's quite exciting because the phone's been ringing off the hook, and it's always exciting to get something out like this, and it's becoming controversial. As I've noticed that there's some pushback already from some people that we've ruffled their feathers in BC. So that's probably to be expected when you're doing. When you're doing the work that we do and the work that the CTF does, you kind of expect some pushback because there's a lot of vested interests and people have a lot of things at stake when you start questioning their little kingdoms that they've built. So things are going really well, and we're quite excited about what the future holds. And reports like this need to become something that we do generally or regularly, I should say.
I totally agree, and we'll touch on we'll get into that in a little bit, but definitely an issue where I know my thinking has evolved quite a bit since the day it was introduced, which is like a great thing to where it is today. But now you had an article that you sent us on judicial advocacy.
Yeah. This is it's a very interesting article. It's not new, but it's one that I go back and I read quite regularly. And it's by an American named Jason Adkins. And what he did in this article is he argued that, look, judicial activism isn't really a concern. And so you think, well, you always hear people in, right-wing circles, conservative circles, generally talking about judicial activism and saying it's a bad thing. And in this article, the author points out that, that's almost like a bogeyman. It's something that someone says, well, I don't like this particular court decision. Oh, therefore it's activism. When really what they're worried about is the result. But what the author points out is a far bigger concern, is when the courts, and in his case in the U.S., when the courts in the U.S. fail to enforce the Constitution and restrict the government. That's a far bigger problem. And you know what? After reading this, it really started to shape my my reading of our Supreme Court and many court decisions. And I started to notice that pattern in Canada as well, and maybe even more than they experience in the U.S. I think because our Constitution is drafted in a very different way, it was never intended to be a document similar to what the U.S. document is. It just wasn't. And so what's happened then is the courts have stepped in, and they have much more latitude in interpreting the Constitution. And many of our friends on the right have for years said, we can't have judicial review, we can't have judicial activism. Parliamentary sovereignty is so important. If the legislature says it, then the court should have no business striking it down. Mm-hmm. Strangely, you know what? I think they won. They won their argument. The courts have been convinced, and we're all going to suffer because of it. Because we have a constitution that doesn't really restrict the government very well, and parliamentary sovereignty is all the rage. Legislatures can pass laws, and the court shouldn't interfere. The result is that individuals who run up against the government and have their rights infringed have a much more difficult time convincing the court that the government was wrong. So, and we see that all over the place in our work. If you can go back to Section 7, the way Section 7 of the Charter has been interpreted right from the beginning. And Section 7 is the guarantee of life, liberty, and security of the person. It is extremely difficult to convince a court that your right to life, liberty, or security of the person has been infringed. It's just incredibly difficult. And that happened early on. 1986, I believe it was 1986, Justice Bertha Wilson said that if we allow everything to be caught up by this right to liberty, then you know what? The charter is going to be trivialized. The right to liberty will be trivialized because everything's an infringement of liberty. Hmm. But now we're bearing the consequences of that decision 30 years later, where the courts have listened to her and been very restrained in finding anything's a restriction on liberty. So effectively now, it's impossible to go to court and successfully argue that your liberty has been infringed. And ironically, what's happened is, Justice Bertha Wilson, she was originally concerned that the charter would be trivialized. But what's happened now is the rights of Canadians, the right to liberty of Canadians, has been trivialized instead. So I think this article about judicial abdication is precisely what's happened in Section 7 laws or jurisprudence, that the courts have shirked their responsibility to enforce the liberty of Canadians against governments that are over-legislating.
Interesting.
So is the answer then, Derek, I mean, I'm not a lawyer and obviously don't follow this nearly as closely as someone like you do. Is the answer then balance? Like, is this a pendulum swing that could come back? Like, where's the line?
Well, I think, it is probably an issue of balance. I mean, strictly speaking, as a lawyer, it is an issue of balance. The way the charter is laid out, if you go to court and say my right to liberty has been infringed, if you can prove that your right to liberty has been infringed, the government still has a chance under Section 1 to prove that the infringement was justified. And what's been happening over the years is that the bar has been set so high to show that your liberty has been infringed that the government never has to justify its actions. What would be a really good resetting of the balance would be if the courts would start saying, okay, that is an infringement of your liberty. And so government, now you're here in court too. Tell us why exactly you need to do this. Why do you need to infringe the liberty of this individual? Mm-hmm. And force the government to justify its actions. That would be a big step. And the public would probably be served well to be able to hear why the government infringes their liberty quite regularly. So it is quite literally an issue of balance.
Yeah. Can you tweet the link to the article out from your Twitter account?
Sure, yeah, I'll do that.
You can go to...
That'd be great, yeah. I wanted to ask as well, do you have an example of this, just to put it in perspective for people who are listening, an example of where this might have happened?
Yeah, actually I do. And it dovetails very nicely with the conversation we're going to have about civil forfeiture.
Perfect. I didn't even plan it.
Yeah, and so I'll tweet that article in a second. I want to concentrate on this so I can actually say it without stumbling over my words. And in 2009, This is the example of judicial abdication.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2009, a man named Robin Chatterjee was at the Supreme Court, and he had actually argued that Ontario's civil forfeiture law was unconstitutional because it was, and it gets a little bit complicated, so I'll try to make it very simple. He wasn't arguing that it was a property infringement or that it infringed his liberty, nothing like that. He made a technical argument based on the Constitution that said the province didn't have the jurisdiction to enact this sort of law. And the reason is that the federal government under the Constitution has the exclusive right to enact criminal legislation. So Chatterjee went to the court and he argued, look, this civil forfeiture law is actually a stealth criminal law, and the province of Ontario is doing it. The province of Ontario isn't allowed to enact criminal laws. And so that was his argument, and he was hoping that the court would strike down the law and say, yes, that is criminal law. No province can do that, and that would have been the end of it. But what the court did is the court bent over backwards to uphold this law, even though it has civil forfeiture has all the typical trappings of criminal legislation. The court found a way to make it work, to save the law. And with court again, I want to be careful here that I'm not saying, oh well, I disagree with the decision, therefore it's bad. Of course, that is also true, but I think that the 2009 Chatterjee decision is shocking to a lot of lawyers, particularly criminal lawyers who are very familiar with criminal law, because they look at civil forfeiture and they say, if that's not criminal law, I don't know what criminal law is.
Right.
And so in that case, in the 2009 case, it looks to me, my cynical reading of the case is that look, they did it. The court did everything they could to uphold the legislation, and they shirked their responsibility to strike it down. I'm not exactly. I don't know why they did that, but that was the result.
Interesting.
Yeah, Paige, do you feel like this is we're getting a glimpse into what goes around the minds of people like Aaron Woodrick and CVG and Derek here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the law world.
Mind. Like a lot of it's I don't know. It's a little bit advanced, but it's so important, right? Because it's almost like the kind of thing that maybe people don't think too much about until they're individually impacted by it. But that's why we need to have, obviously, the good precedents and make sure that these are well, certainly that courts are defending the individual against the government in these cases. I mean, that's hugely concerning, especially if you are that individual that's up against this, right?
And you hit it right on the head there, Paige. It's people don't really care until they're personally impacted from it, and that's all of the work at the CCF is that way. And the human rights legislation that we've often been intervening or involved in court cases regarding, that's the same thing. People don't realize what a hate speech provision is until they accidentally run afoul of the law or someone uses the law against them. Because, on the surface, like hate speech, of course that should be illegal. It's hateful. Yeah. And, they dress it up in ways, these pieces of legislation are dressed up in ways that make them sound really good. Who can disagree with that? We're helping the children. Yeah. We're saving bunnies. The planet will be better. We'll all be happy. That's what it's all about.
Who can oppose civil forfeiture? We're taking money from drug dealers and taking the money from the gangsters. Yeah.
So if you're against civil forfeiture, really what you do is you hate bunnies. Mm-hmm. That's what it comes down to.
You're either with us or you're with the child pornographers, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Thank you.
So one of my favorite real quotes from government.
Yeah. I wish I was making that up, people.
That's a very interesting one. Yeah, that for people who are listening and don't know what that was the original cyberbullying law brought in, proposed by Vic Taves, I guess. It never actually was passed. But he in a presser actually said, well, either you support this law or you're on the side of the child pornographers. I like to think there must be some middle ground in there. But what is also interesting about that is I think it was titled Protecting Children from Internet Predators Act, something like that. And if you did like a word search in the actual bill, the word predator never occurred in it, and it had nothing to do with that. It was just like 70 pages of granting police new powers of search. So it's very Orwell. Again, this is exactly what Orwell talked about.
Yeah, for sure. Paige, what's new with you?
Well, so my what's new, the government here, the Alberta government had its throne speech this week. Ooh, we lost Derek.
Hopefully he comes back. He'll come back.
had its throne speech this week, and in it they talked a lot about what we can expect in the coming legislative session. Now that the legislature is sitting again, the budget is coming out in mid-April, which is, I'm sure, by any measure set to be a whopper, because we now know that we're staring down the barrel of a potentially $10.4 billion operational deficit. That's not even including infrastructure. Can't wait to see the number with the infrastructure. I'm sure it's around $15 billion or more, so it's quite concerning. And that's just the deficit. Obviously, our debt is racking up quickly as well. But they made an announcement as well this week about some corporate welfare. So a big part of the government's upcoming legislative agenda is corporate welfare. They're calling it value-added industries or economic diversification, all of these, lots of different buzzwords for sure, but essentially what it is taking money from taxpayers and giving it to companies in the name of creating jobs. And we all know government is so great at creating jobs. So the latest example of this, hey, Derek, now you're back. The latest example of this is the government giving $10 million to a biofuels company. And they're going, they're saving the planet, of course, but they're also creating jobs, which is what this is about, this economic diversification. And so they're creating 35 jobs in Edmonton. So if you do the math, we're spending about $285,000 plus $285,700 per job that we're creating here in the government. And of course, we know when the government's got a really nasty fiscal situation, as we have in the province right now, taking money out of the hands of job creators being those people who are in the rest of the province that are actually running businesses, that are actually creating jobs, and taking it and dedicating almost $300,000 per new job is just such a terrible idea. And it's so bad, especially here in Alberta, because we did this experiment in the 80s under Premier Getty at that time of just, infusing money into weird, like we bought an airline, we got involved in like the meat packing business or something. Like the government was just investing in all these different things in the name of economic diversification and creating jobs. We ended up losing just billions and billions of dollars on that at that time. And so now it's almost like we've hit the reset button and we're doing that again. And so so the latest announcement is of that vein. So it's rather frustrating for those of us who, have just done a little rudimentary research on Alberta's history with corporate welfare.
Oh, but Paige, cross your fingers, because Don Getty gave way to Ralph Klein.
That's true. But this is what I keep saying, and this is the problem. It's like, why do we need to be obsessed with cyclical government? Why do we need to be obsessed with like, oh, we're going to spend, and then we have to enter this era where we cut. Like if we start now and we stop going up this, really harmful ramp of spending, then we're not going to have to go through the Ralph Klein era cuts, which were necessary at that time to get the economy back on track. If we reduce spending now, we can do it in a much more measured way. A big conversation that's happening in the province right now is on government employee salaries, specifically salaries of teachers, because they're entering their contract negotiations and because their contract expires at the end of August here in the province. And I'm saying, roll back salaries by 10%. The salaries are bloated by every reasonable measure anyway. They're some of the highest paid teachers in the entire world. We can afford to do this. So why not do this now? Because down the road, as our debt load and deficit gets worse, we're not going to be talking about cutting salaries. We're going to be talking as a province about cutting people, right? Cutting teachers. And that's something that actually does impact those people who are, getting those services, in this case, students. If you want to talk about healthcare, you're talking about everybody, for example. So I don't know why, we're obsessed with this sort of spend, cut cycle. I wish that we would just sort of steady the course and make more reasonable policy decisions now.
Yeah, no, you summed it up great. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, or what we've seen the government try to do here in British Columbia. They're holding spending to the past 5 years, about 2.3% a year growth. This year, I think it's 2.5, which heading into an election next year, not too bad when you consider what our neighbors are doing. So have fun with that. My what's new comes from Saskatchewan via bus to British Columbia, where apparently Saskatchewan social workers put two young homeless men on a bus, one-way bus tickets to British Columbia, and then were stunned when this suddenly went public. The media met the young men in British Columbia when they arrived. one of them, I guess, has family here, so they made the suggestion that they would go to Victoria and got a bus ticket. The next guy in line overheard that and said, "Hey, if you're giving up free tickets to British Columbia, I'll take one," and did. This is a big problem, though, I think, for I don't know. It's probably not a big problem for Premier Wall inside Saskatchewan in the middle or the beginning of an election campaign, but certainly caught the interest of British Columbia because there has long been a suspicion among British Columbia people that the rest of the country ships all of their homeless folks out here. You see that also. There's also a suspicion within British Columbia that, for example, cities downtown, Vancouver, New Westminster, and Burnaby, for example, will ship out homeless people via SkyTrain to Surrey and out into the suburbs as well. So one suspects that's where got the idea. It's just terribly problematic, though, because, of course, we all have problems. Every jurisdiction has problems. Every jurisdiction has issues with the homeless. We have tent cities being set up in Victoria and other places across BC. So to actually have this real evidence that Saskatchewan's doing this, certainly causing people to ask some questions of what the heck's going on in Premier Walls, Saskatchewan.
Well, so was it the government? Was it government officials who put these homeless people on the bus?
Social workers, bought people who work with the homeless there. Social workers bought tickets on the taxpayer dime in Saskatchewan and sent them out via Greyhound.
Is that something that could be FOIP'd? I mean, that takes money, right? And if there was some money that was spent, that kind of thing could be FOIP'd.
Well, Paige and Todd McKay.
I think it'll be. I think we know how much the ticket costs. The question is, how many times have they done it? Yeah.
I grew up in Saskatchewan, and I mean, I left 15 years ago, something like that.
By a Greyhound, paid for by the
government? No, fortunately. By airplane, and I went the opposite direction. But that was always the rumor, right? I mean, Saskatchewan, when I was there, it was always bleeding off people. What was left is, kids and the elderly, and there's like a big gap in the middle of productive working age people that weren't there because there were no jobs.
Right.
Thank you, fiscal policies of the government then. But it was always the rumor that, hey, let's go to a different province where they have better social welfare system. And so everyone, the rumor was people went to BC for it. Now, I've never heard of the government actually buying tickets for people, but it was that's something else entirely. But
these poor guys get off the bus in Vancouver, and there's 25 media waiting for them. And somehow it got out. I don't know if he put it on their social media or how it got out, but there's 25 people waiting for them. Now they've been offered jobs. They've been connected. Like BC's going above and beyond for these two. Yeah. But, what? Sorry. Yeah. I'm almost nonplussed at the whole thing.
That's remarkable because, I remember, when I was living in Vancouver, it was often said that there's a sort of almost, I guess, homeless tourism or whatever it was called, just because of the climate, right? I mean, if you don't have shelter, then generally BC is a better place than most of the rest of the country to live in the winter. So it makes sense that, if you are a homeless individual, that you might want to, go that direction. And obviously I'm talking about coastal BC, but the idea that, this is not voluntary, that governments are actually encouraging this, that is because there are so many programs that are supporting homeless individuals, especially in the Vancouver area, and I'm sure in Victoria as well. And that's a huge expense, right? That's a big expense. And wow, I've never heard of something like that happening in Canada. I remember there was some sort of didn't that happen in New York? They sent people out on a bus. Wasn't it Rudy Giuliani that sent homeless people out on a bus to just suburbs?
Sounds plausible.
I think that happened. Yeah. I might be making it up, but I'm pretty sure.
Well,
so maybe that's where Saskatchewan got the idea. But it seems, it's weird. It's obviously a burden on the taxpayer of BC, but it also just seems kind of like an unethical thing to do.
But isn't it completely rational also? Like if you're in Saskatchewan, how much does it cost, comparing the cost of a ticket on the bus versus all the other costs associated with keeping that person in the province?
But maybe they should have given BC a heads up then.
Hopefully it doesn't catch on, but
yes. Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a million FOIPs going in to see how many times this has been done.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get to the main event here. Let's talk civil forfeiture. And civil forfeiture is one of those issues that sounds great in theory, and then you see it in practice, and you wonder what the heck is going on. I first saw this when British Columbia brought in the law probably about 10 years ago now, almost. And, it made sense, right? You seize assets from drug dealers, who had bought it with proceeds of crime, and it was a way for, the public or the victims to claw back money from these bad guys. This
just
law,
there, Jordan, can I jump in? Is that all that it is? Like civil forfeiture is just in instances of criminal behavior where
it's supposed to be.
Supposed to be. Okay, so just so just there for anybody who's watching.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
So the Canadian Constitution Foundation and the Institute for Liberal Studies put out a report, and here it is on my handy iPad. You can download it from their website, theccf.ca. And they looked at civil forfeiture laws across Canada. And Derek's here to tell us, Derek, I think I've summed up the original intent of the law pretty well. Yep. How the heck have we strayed so far from its original purpose?
Well, there's always mission creep with all these sorts of things, and there's a giant industry that's becoming built on this. I don't know if you remember back when Ezra Levant was really trumpeting on about the human rights acts throughout Canada, and I think he often referred to them as a human rights industry, where people would make their living in these industries. Well, I'm suspicious that civil forfeiture, if it's not that already, it's becoming that. So yeah, you were right. It was originally intended to deter crime and to provide compensation to victims. That was the idea. It was civil forfeiture entered Canada in 2001, and it was Jim Flaherty, who was then the Minister of Justice, I think, in Ontario for the PCs. And it was based upon the RICO laws out of the U.S. So these are laws that were meant to go after organized crime. So it's guys like Al Capone, right? He's slippery. You can never actually peg a crime on him, but he's getting rich, and everyone knows he's doing it illegally. So let's just take his stuff from him and undercut his capacity to do illegal things and hurt people. So that was the original idea, is that it's the criminal protections are just so onerous for the police to have to deal with, that and the judicial system, that they can never put this guy in prison. So if we can't put him in prison, let's just take his stuff. So
kind of like, okay, we know somebody's a drug dealer. We can't pin him down for it, but he drives a Mercedes-Benz. So we know that was involved. So we're going to forfeit the Mercedes. Is that sort of...
Yeah. Okay. Likely an Escalade, but
likely an Escalade.
Yeah. I don't hang out.
The Mercedes would end up in a police chief hands, and it'd be the company car.
Yeah. So that was the original intent. So we have to remember the two things. So deterring crime. So that's like taking Al Capone's stuff away from him.
Yeah.
And compensating victims. So think of all the damage that Al Capone did. Well, he stole a bunch of stuff from some people. He broke their shop windows. We'll take his illegally acquired vehicles, sell them, and give the money to the people who had their shop windows broken. Mm-hmm. That was the original intent, right?
Yeah.
But it's gotten away from that because, it doesn't take creative people very long, smart people very long to realize, let's just look at this. We have these people around here that we think are committing crimes. We don't really know, but we're going to have a difficult time proving it. But we can take their stuff even if they haven't committed a crime. So that's what started to happen now, is that different civil forfeiture offices throughout Canada have looked at this as basically an alternative process, an alternative to criminal law. So now, if you're suspected of committing an illegal act, you could lose your property. But it's even worse than that, because civil forfeiture actually isn't a proceeding that's brought against a person. So Paige, let's just say you're some big kingpin in Chicago in the 1930s.
I knew it.
Okay, let's imagine. And when your stuff was forfeited, or these types of proceedings were brought against your stuff, it wouldn't be you that was named. It would be something. Let's say you were stealing fish. That was your big thing. So it would be the queen against, the queen and a pile of fish. So it's always against the property that the crown wants to forfeit. So you get notice and you get to go defend yourself against the property. But now think of this. If it's against the property, not against the person, then what if somebody uses your property and does an illegal act with it? Well, you could be completely innocent of any wrongdoing, but it's against your property, so you could still lose your property for somebody else's wrongdoing. And that's what's starting to happen in Canada. And it just sounds so ridiculous, but it does happen. So these proceedings are against property. They're meant to deter crime, and they're meant to provide compensation to victims. But then the other thing that's really interesting is that there's a very low standard of proof. In criminal law, if you're to be convicted of a criminal act, the Crown has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's just say that's like 99% certainty that you actually did the illegal act, the criminal act. But now in these civil forfeiture proceedings, it's actually the civil standard of proof. So it's just beyond, or it's just on the balance of probabilities. So now it's 51% certainty. So, okay, so it's against your property. They only need 51% certainty. And anything, basically, in BC and Ontario, anything that's illegal, anything that you do that's illegal with that property makes it subject. They can go after it with a civil forfeiture application.
Yeah. Well, it's even worse now, right, Derek? Like, if I own an apartment building and I rent an apartment to some kids who run a dial dope operation out of it, I have no idea what's going on. Yep. Technically, the government can, under civil forfeiture, seize my apartment building. And
it has happened. It has happened at least twice that I know of in Ontario. Yeah. Landlords. Here's some names. Terry and Margaret Riley. They operated two properties in Orillia in Ontario. And because of their background, they were actually very concerned with homelessness and addiction. Terry was, he was on a committee in Orillia to help end homelessness in the town. And Maggie, his wife, her father was, I believe, an Anglican priest downtown Toronto. And so she grew up, volunteering, working in a soup kitchen. So this was actually, they came by this honesty. They were very concerned about the problem of homelessness. So one of the rental properties that they owned together in Orillia, they actually rented it out far below market value to people who were kind of on the edges of, the cusp of society, folks that were struggling with addiction, didn't have work, and they would, really try to help them out. And they from what I understand, they were doing this as kind of good works. Mm-hmm. So what ended up happening is some of their tenants were implicated in some illicit drug activity. Now in Ontario, if you're a landlord, you can't just barge into your tenant's place and, start overturning the couches and looking for pot. You can't do that. You will, get in a lot of trouble if you try to do that. But the province of Ontario kind of expects you to be able to do that at the same time, because what they did was they said, hey, you know what? This apartment building of yours, Riley, is being paid for by people who are making their money doing drugs. And so some of this money in here that's going to you was drug money. It's dirty money. Therefore, we're going to have to forfeit this building from you. And it was the tenants, the Rileys, were never even implicated in anything that was wrong. They weren't suspected of committing a crime, nothing. They just happened to be the property owners whose tenants were committing crimes or allegedly committing crimes. And so they're in the process of losing their place right now. And it's about $400,000 property. And, they're fighting it to the bitter end. When we released our report just a few days ago, the Toronto Star interviewed Meg Riley about her travails, because she's the perfect example of somebody who was literally perfectly innocent of any wrongdoing. Yet the province of Ontario is going to steal $400,000 worth of property from her.
Mm-hmm. No charges. I mean, there are no charges.
No. Wow. And that's the other thing, is because of the civil standard of proof. So in a criminal case, you have this very high standard. In a civil case, it's much lower. And if you you have the fire in your belly and you really want to go after the criminals, well, it's pretty hard to actually go to court and pin this criminal act on them. So why don't we just take their stuff instead? Mm-hmm. And so all those protections that are built into the charter, like that you're proven, or that you're innocent until proven guilty, that you're assured, a fair and public hearing before an impartial adjudicator, all those things, those rights that we afford to criminals, well, you don't get that in civil forfeiture, because this isn't criminal law. This is civil law. Yeah. So, what happens is law enforcement is incentivized to take the easy route. It's perfectly rational. Take the easy route. You'll get some cash out of it. You can roll that back into your budget. And so that's what they do. They, this apartment building belonging to the Rileys, there's some unsavory tenants there. So what we'll do is we'll just take that property and get after those tenants that way. Of course, the Rileys are collateral damage. But as a judge pointed out in one of the hearings they've had, even drug dealers need a place to live. Like, you can't just make drug dealers homeless either. So there's just basic fairness problems. Like it's just not a good thing.
The fairness is something I want to talk to you about because out here in BC, we have our government-run casinos have been nailed for helping people. Well, not helping people. People have been laundering money through them. And my thought was, if that was a privately owned casino, the Crown could seize the casino.
Yep. Yeah. Now,
which got me thinking, like, how can I pretend that I have some sort of stake in this, that I can actually sue the government?
Yeah. Too bad you can't. You don't.
Too bad we're not standing. And work on that. We'll all get rich.
There's a criminal, a very little used procedure. I think it's available in Canada. I know it's available in the UK, where if the Crown refuses to prosecute a criminal proceeding, you can take it up yourself. It's called a private prosecution. I'm pretty sure that wouldn't apply to civil forfeiture, but it might be kind of an interesting publicity stunt.
I'm telling you, we could fund the heck out of the CCF.
You point out something really interesting there, though, Jordan, because it's. The government is involved in this casino, and there's allegedly there's people laundering money through it, and so maybe you can get the government's property that way through civil forfeiture. But in the Riley's case, not to beat the dead horse here, but many of their tenants were actually on social assistance. So when you think about it, the government of Ontario is paying these people and that money is going to rent, and that money is going to the Rileys. So really, what the government of Ontario is saying that they're involved in civil forfeiture, and it's their own money too. They're actually part of this themselves. It's not just the Rileys. Maybe the government of Ontario should lose something.
It's
crazy. I would like to ask as well about so there's a taxpayer angle here, I think, and in a lot of the media stories that I've seen about this, it's sort of being characterized as a provincial cash grab in many cases, and how provinces are using civil forfeiture as that. Can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, yeah, it's now this some of this I have to speculate, and it's just the way it's going to be because these offices are not very transparent. Their financials, for instance, there's no requirement in any of the laws that we could find in Canada for any sort of transparent financial accounting, what's actually happening. No auditor general has taken a look at these offices, see what they spend their money on, how much they're spending, how much they disperse. We don't know. And they're rather, they don't like people asking questions. So they rebuffed us many times. And FOIPing doesn't work either because sometimes they actually don't keep records. So having said all that, the taxpayer angle might be this. Now, initially, it might seem that this is really great because taxpayers don't have to pay it. It's criminals that have to start paying for these things. That might seem like a really good angle. But, what's happening here is that there's so many important rights that are being overturned by this type of legislation. Like, the protections that are afforded to criminals, you don't get, Paige, if you have a civil forfeiture application brought against you. And by the way, you'll have to pay to defend yourself. So you're going to have lost time. You're going to be purchasing, a lawyer's services. And they'll always effectively put a lien on the property they're going after. So you can't get rid of it. Let's say it was your house. They put this preservation order on your house, and you don't know if you're going to keep it. And it drags on for 2 or 3 years. Well, you're not even going to paint your house because why would you put any money into that thing? So your assets get devalued over time. So maybe the taxpayer angle is just that we have no idea what these bureaucracies cost. We don't know what they're doing with their money. Yeah. And then there's also the other side of it is they're overturning many of the rights that are very, very important that protect us from unfair prosecutions and such. And you and I, Jordan, we all live in a country where our rights are restricted in ways we don't even fully appreciate until we run up against this system.
Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What happens to the assets when they get them? Is this where the police, do they have police auctions? Is that the same kind of thing?
Yeah, that's what. Now, I don't know if it's the same in every province or every item is dealt with the same way, but yeah, they usually dispose of the item, which would be some sort of a sale, and then that money goes. Yeah, that money goes into generally some sort of a victim's account.
Okay.
And then it is dispersed from there. But there's a picture of something. I think they actually seized that vehicle from some. That was the civil forfeiture office.
That was Abbotsford, BC. They seized it and then repainted it as a "We'll catch you riding dirty."
Yeah.
Okay, that's ringing a bell now. I want a Hummer. Can I?
So
I get myself a Hummer.
Yeah, well, you're in the wrong business, is what it comes down to.
But there are American police forces now that are essentially run. Philadelphia, I think, a massive portion of their budget is just civil forfeiture. Yep. And this is the problem. When you give them unfettered access, there's no one overseeing to make sure it's actually fair. And
it incentivizes, like it's all about incentives, right? Yeah. It incentivizes this type of enforcement. So let's say you have two cops on the beat on a street, and they have a scarcity of time, and they can only do so many things. But what's going to make them look really good at the end of the day is if they're going to stop the guy who's holding up the bodega with a knife, or they can maybe forfeit the knife and keep that. I don't know, because it was the instrument or something of crime. Or would it be better to go after somebody who is driving, pretty fast down the street in a Ferrari? Well, they can seize that Ferrari and sell it, and oh man, now we have $250,000 that we've. So what does it do now? Speeding is obviously speeding isn't something that anyone would endorse. It's not safe. People can be hurt. But when no one was hurt and they take a $250,000 car versus, turning around, looking the other way and going after a different crime that actually caused somebody harm, so it incentivizes going after the car versus actual difficult police work. And so that's problematic. But it's all about incentives. There's one really funny instance of an American police force that seized, I think it was a margarita machine.
Yes.
And
yes.
They kept it in their office and had margaritas.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Google John Oliver civil forfeiture. You'll see he did a store piece on it. It's insane what these police forces have done.
As normal, the Americans find a way to do things more extremely than we have in Canada. Yeah. But I believe it's in Tennessee. There's a highway that is a major feeder up to the northeast part of the country from Mexico. And everyone knows that drugs travel north on the highway and the money travels south on the highway. So you would think if the police were interested in stopping the criminal activity, they would be pulling over people driving north and getting the drugs. But no, who wants drugs? They want cash. So what they do is they go over to the other side of the highway, stop the people returning to Mexico that have the cash, forfeit it, and roll it over into their own budgets to increase enforcement activity. And so it's that type of incentives that we actually do see happening in Canada. Like here, one of my clients, Bruce Montague, he tried to protest the gun registry a number of years ago, and he let all of his licenses expire, relevant licenses. And he thought that, hey, now I'll get my day in court to challenge the law. And he did get his day in court. He lost. He went to prison. And after he got out of prison, he finds out, hey, I've done my time criminally. The criminal proceedings are all done, but the province of Ontario now wants to take my house from me because they said your house is the instrument of crime because you ran your business out of your house and you weren't properly licensed for a period of time. Therefore, your house is this den of criminal activity. So we need it. Well, this is very strange because, we think we could have defended him pretty well on that. But a while after those proceedings started, the province of Ontario came to him and said, hey, look, let's settle. You get to keep your house, but you know what? Pay us $50,000 and never tell anyone about it. Keep it a complete secret and pay us $50,000 and we'll go away. You'll have no problems with us anymore. So if I did that to you, Jordan, that's called extortion.
Exactly.
That's illegal. You can't do that. Can you imagine if someone in Calgary started a business? I think I'm going to protect people on the street. I'm going to protect shop owners' windows because windows might get broken. So, you shop owners, you can pay me a protection fee. Otherwise, your windows might get broken, and don't tell anyone about it. And really, what it comes down to, it's extortion. And Bruce and his wife, they both rejected the offer because they saw for what it was. And we have no idea how common that is because maybe lots of people pay big money to the government and then can never talk about it. This could be very common. Like that's one thing we'd love to know. We'd love to hear stories from people about what offers they were given. Yeah,
no, that's a great point. You go province by province. British Columbia gets an F. Rightfully so. They've seized $41 million worth of assets and $1.5 million has flowed back to victim compensation programs. I'm going to take this report. I'm going to actually write a couple of these former AGs and Solicitor Generals that are kicking around BC who seem to always want to weigh in on issues now that they're out of office. See what they think about the evolution of this because it can't be what they initially envisioned.
Yeah. Now, we have had some pushback in our numbers there, and we do need to look into that. But it's very strange. A lot of the media had been reporting in 2012 in BC that the Forfeiture Office, which had existed since 2006, that it hadn't made any payments at all. And there's a press release that looks suspiciously like that from the civil forfeiture folks. But they're starting to push back. They're saying, no, we've made payments out of here. And what they do though is the money doesn't go back to victims. Like, that's the frustrating thing, is it's supposed to deter crime and compensate victims. Well, here's an example of what victim compensation means in BC. Okay, so here's an organization in the Fraser region which received $40,000 from seized property and forfeited property to run a project. And this is what the Langley Times reported the project is about. The project will develop a series of recommendations through province-wide consultation with the aim of increasing victim satisfaction with the criminal justice system. So what they're doing is they're spending $40,000 to make you happy with the criminal law.
Yeah. So
that to them is compensating victims somehow, making you feel good. Yeah. And then here's the other thing that's telling. Where does the money go? Well, one of the things listed at the bottom is police education. Okay, that's fair enough. Training and specialized crime prevention equipment. Specialized crime prevention. Maybe that's Hummers. I don't know. I'm not sure, but it's an indication that a lot of this money gets rolled back into enforcement. It funds the money that they seize goes back into funding the seizure of more, and that's really problematic because it's an industry. It starts to create an industry in itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Derek, you guys have done amazing work on this file, and greatly appreciate it. I had picked up at a conference last fall the U.S. report on it, which by the Institute for Justice, and that really piqued my interest. And I always thought I got to get to civil forfeiture, but thank God you guys have done it much better than I ever could. So I'm greatly appreciative of that and your work. Folks, the CCF.ca, they're a donor-funded organization. So they go out there, they fight for the little guy, Irv LaRue. They saw him through the early days of his fight for duty of care. They're a great organization. So go to the CCF.ca, support them, sign up, give them a few bucks, and let's support these guys because they're doing amazing work. Thanks, Derek. Now it's time for our usual feature, the Waste of the Week. Okay, so there's this beautiful new video ad produced by BC Transit highlighting two rock climbers coming down the famous Stawamus Chief in Squamish, BC. They come down. It's a gorgeous drone photography. I mean, like, beautiful, beautiful thing. They come down, they walk into the parking lot, and they board a BC Transit bus with all their gear to go home after their amazing day on the rock. One problem, BC Transit doesn't go anywhere near the Stawamus Chief or that parking lot. And when this was pointed out to the powers that be at BC Transit, a spin doctor was rolled out to answer why this ad is like this. He called the criticism picky. Well, actually, it's not picky. It's called false advertising. And needless to say, this week I dropped a Freedom of Information request in the mail to find out how much this silliness costs taxpayers. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Awesome.
Well, that's it for this episode of Tax Talk from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Be sure to follow Paige on Twitter at Paige McP, follow Derek at Derek James From, and follow me at Jordan Bateman. If you're watching this on Blab, be sure to subscribe to our feed and give us props. We're very needy people, and we need those props. If you're listening to us on iTunes later, please subscribe, give us a good rating. We got up to number 18 in the Government and Organizations podcast lineup this week, so cracking the top 20 worldwide in the smallest possible podcast category. So big news here at the Taxpayers Federation. You can check out our website at taxpayer.com, and we'll be back next week, Friday, March 18th, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern. Paige and I will be back and ready to talk more taxes. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.